Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behavior Revolution Scriptures, and we're in Ruth right now, this short little book of only 4 chapters called Ruth, and I'm just finding it amazing. It's such a beautiful story. It's been put here for a reason. What is that reason? We're going to go into that today, more about the heart of the message of Ruth and why, because it doesn't mention Yahusha a whole lot, this story. But it's just everyday, real people having a real experience in a real society a long time ago. But Yahusha showing us through that he wants to work with everyday people in everyday lives, in everyday society today. And the principles and the behavior is still the same that he expects from his bride. So, we talked about querulous. That's the word, isn't it? Querulous. Are you in a querulous situation? That was the word from last episode, going through Ruth and the doctrine of complaint. People complaining all the time. How does Yahusha feel about complainers? So, if you're in a predicament, in a calamity or a consequence, it's because of your own damn behavior. So that's what you've got to look at and change. So today, we're going into the idea of the Redeemer and what that entails, because if you've heard this story before, everybody associates Yahusha, our Redeemer, our Deliverer, with the character of Boaz, who we're going to meet in this episode today. So let's go for it and see what unfolds. Today is called the Redeemer. As we go through this chapter, take special notice how often Ruth will be referred to as Ruth the Moabitess or Ruth the foreigner. Yet the locals of Bethlehem are well aware of the switch of allegiance that Ruth has made to Yahusha and to Yisrael, and they are also aware of Ruth's loving care of Naomi, her mother-in-law. So calling Ruth a Moabite is not meant as a slap or rejection of her crossing over and conversion. Rather, it's just a fact of her background, that she has made the decision to leave Moab and its deities behind, leave them all behind, and cleave to Yisrael. It's been accepted, and the fact that she's not a biological Hebrew is equally accepted as well. Because Bethlehem, Judah, this tribe is particularly, at this point anyway, a lot more trustworthy, a lot more obedient in their behaviour, in living the instructions, than all the other ratbag tribes that are falling off. And we saw all that in the Judges, being overwhelmed and taken over by the outside nations because of their behaviour as a consequence. So, but Judah seems to be holding it together a lot more, and so they're not holding it against Ruth, they're not holding it against Ruth that she's crossed over, she's converted to Yisrael. They've welcomed her with open arms, but the account, the story, calls her Ruth the Moabitess just because it does, all right? So let's go into Ruth chapter 2. So where are we up to? All the men died. Remember in our last episode, all the men died. Naomi's husband died. Naomi's sons died, and then there's just 3 women left, daughter-in-laws. And one daughter-in-law went back home to her parents in Moab, and Naomi said, I want to stay with you. Please don't make me leave. I'll go where you go. Your Elohim will be my Elohim. Your home will be my home. May we never part. So, and then they went back to Bethlehem. But the dire consequence of Naomi's situation is, because she's got no males in her life to look after her, and she's old, it's kind of like having a death sentence and being in poverty. So that's where we're up to. Going back to Bethlehem. One day, Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, Hey Mum, I'll go see if I can find someone who'll let me pick up grain left by the harvest workers in the fields. Because it was the custom at harvest time to leave some grain in the field for the poor to pick up. That was the instruction in Leviticus 19. We went through that. So that's just what they did. The harvesters left some grain behind for the poor people. So she's like, I'll go and see if I can find some a field that I can pick up grain in. Go for it, love, Naomi agreed. So Ruth went straight out, and Yahusha guided her over to a field owned by an important rich man named Boaz, who also turned out to be a relative of Naomi's husband, Elimelech. Interesting. So she's found a field. Why did she come across this field? Because Yahusha guided her there. She didn't know she was being guided, but this is the field she found. And it just so happened to be Boaz's field. And Boaz just happened to be a relative, distant relative, of Naomi's dead husband Elimelech. Naomi is not blood related to Boaz. Rather, Boaz is a wealthy man belonging to Naomi's husband Elimelech's clan, who were a fruitful, well-to-do clan of the tribe of Judah. When the text says that Naomi had a relative, the Hebrew word being translated is moda. Often the English translator was jumping to conclusions and renders this into kinsman, referring to a kinsman redeemer. However, moda simply indicates a familial association or an acquaintance. So in no way is Boaz at this point in the story being painted as anything but a rather distant relative in Elimelech's clan. There is no assumption of family obligation on Boaz toward Naomi at this point. Distant relative, So it's not like he suddenly rocks up and goes, I didn't know I was supposed to look after you. No, nobody assumes that he's supposed to look after them. No, not at all. Not at this point. It's just a distant relative. So this was interesting because remember, we're going back in time. We want to experience this for all that it's got for us. So Yisrael had like a welfare program, or what Aussies call Centrelink, when you're on the dole, or when you're getting payments, or when you've got a pension, or anything like that, JobKeeper looking for work, you go to Centrelink. I think in America you've got food stamps, things like that, welfare programs. Well, Yisrael had a welfare program too. Ruth and Naomi represent the poor of Bethlehem. And as widows, they have no visible means of support. So Ruth does what the norm for that era was. She decides to go out and glean. Gleaning was the food stamp / welfare program of ancient times. Gleaning gave the poverty-stricken the opportunity to obtain food. But we have to keep in mind we have to keep in mind is that in this agricultural society, gleaning occurred simultaneously with harvesting. Gleaning happens simultaneously with harvesting. So just as a farmer has to sow, then tend, and then wait for the crop to grow up and ripen before he can harvest it and use the produce, so it was for the gleaners. The poor had to work behind the reapers, the harvesters, immediately picking up what the reapers left behind, with the idea of gathering more than they would use in a single day. They would need to store up the produce, usually grain, that they gleaned, to use during the bulk of the time that there was the planting. And growing cycle, when there was no gathering of food, no harvesting to occur. So just like the farmers, people who owned the property, had to wait for harvest time, so did all the poor people that were looking for food, unless they could go to, well, it wasn't another field because harvest time was national. It was about the seasons. Unless they could find scraps from somewhere else, they had to make their produce that they gleaned, they had to make it last as well. So, but also, let's be clear that gleaning was a right of the poor in Israel, not a privilege. It was a right. They had the right to do it. It was not something that the field's owner could grant or not grant to gleaners according to his charity. Nope. The Torah made it Yahusha's law that the owners must not harvest all their crops, but rather leave sufficient for the poor, and especially for the widows. So Ruth could literally wander around and choose at her own discretion which field she would like to glean. In fact, part of the law on gleaning was that in lean times, the owners of the fields were required to make more of their crops available to the gleaners than usual. That is quite a contrast to the more typical human reaction, whereby in tough times, like our nation and the modern world in general are experiencing now, that people give less of their incomes to charity, even though the number of needy is on the rise. So back in this Commonwealth, back in this Yahusha's instructions, he told all the field owners that they had to leave a certain amount there. We dealt with this back in Leviticus. Pretty sure it was Leviticus. So that the poor and the needy were looked after. Make sure, I remember that scripture, make sure you leave some of your produce, some of your harvest behind. Just leave it on the ground. They can pick it up themselves, So that's interesting, because this was a right. That wasn't just can I come and glean in your field? No, you could go to whatever field you wanted. It was your right as a poor person to be able to pick up produce off the ground that the harvesters had left. They take theirs, they bundle it up, the big mass amounts of it, and take it, and there's all this stuff left on the ground that you can pick up and collect yourself. See over here what they're doing. So she's found Boaz's field and she started gleaning. So when Boaz left Bethlehem, he went out to see the reaping progress in his fields. And he said to the harvest workers, "G'day guys, Yahuwah bless you, eh?" "You too, boss," they replied. This was a standard greeting for that local area. This was a standard greeting for that. What was? Yahuwah bless you. This was a standard greeting for that local area. When we remember that Ruth lived during the days of the judges and recall the spiritual darkness that hovered over Israel during that era, this greeting and response indicate that Bethlehem was a community of true obedient believers of Yahusha, the Elohim of Israel, who continued to dedicate themselves to the purer ways rather than to give in to the rampant falling away and idolatry of the times. So it's quite encouraging to see guys, hey, g'day guys, Yahuwah bless you, yeah? Bringing Yahusha into your conversation. Very hard to do that these days, isn't it? In the world, it's impossible. You'd be stupid to do it. But it shows that this tribe, particularly in Bethlehem, they were keeping it together. They were trying to stay obedient. So Boaz has rocked up. G'day, guys. Then Boaz asked the men in charge of the reapers, "Who's that gorgeous young Sheila over there?" His language implies that he assumes her to be unmarried and living under her father's authority, not a married woman or a widow. "Who's that gorgeous young Sheila over there?" She's the young Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi, remember? She asked if she could pick up grain we left. She's been out there slaving in this bloody hot sun all morning with no rest. In small towns and cities, very little happens without it getting around. So Ruth and Naomi's story was well known among the locals. So that's who she is. So Boaz went over to Ruth and said, "Young lady, listen to me. I think it'd be best for you to stick around here in my field and not move on to anyone else's to pick up grain, because the women will rock up here soon to gather up what my men have cut, and it'd be much easier and safer for you to follow along behind them. Don't worry, my daughter, I've warned my men not to bother you, and whenever you are thirsty, you can drink from the water jars they've all filled." So he said, "Don't worry, my daughter. My daughter is not saying that she is his daughter, or even under his family authority. It's just the way an older person would speak to a younger person affectionately." So just as we saw Naomi refer to Ruth as my daughter, we now have the equally elderly Boaz addressing the considerably younger Ruth in that same way. So sorry ladies, but this is not the tale of a dashing young man riding to the rescue of a lovely damsel in distress. Boaz is an old guy. I didn't know that. Ruth was considerably younger than Boaz. He's an old dude. And Ruth bowed down to the ground. "You know I'm a foreigner here from far away, so why are you being so kind to me?" Ruth was getting special treatment, but why? Was she exceptionally beautiful and this old man Boaz was attracted to her? That may have played a minor role, but probably not at all. So why would he be acting so favourably to her, especially since she's a foreigner? There it is again, that reference to Ruth and her Moabite heritage. Although Ruth, to Naomi's surprise, rejected her past identity to take on a new one with Israel and Israel's Elohim, her ethnicity as a Moabite remained with her. And I don't have a problem accepting that she was a Moabite. There was nothing inherently wrong with the Moabites. They were descendants of Abraham too. Keturah, I think we said in our episode ago. They were allowed to intermarry, so whether she was a Moabite or not, the scripture says she was a Moabite, no problem there. There's no problem with that. So why are you helping me? I'm a foreigner. You don't know me, you don't owe me anything. Why are you being so kind to me? Boaz says, because I've heard how kind you've been helping your mother-in-law ever since your husband died. You even left your own father and mother to come and live in a foreign land among people you don't even know. It's wonderful to see, and may Yahuwah, the Elohim of Yisrael, reward you for what you've done, since it's under his wings you've come to for protection. I ask that he blesses your obedience. Boaz says that it's her character that he so admires, and we should believe it as his honest truth, because he's a man of pretty good character, just like the other two women are, so we can believe his word. So this is why he's so impressed with Ruth, because how kind she is in looking after her mother-in-law when she could have just buggered off and found another man and had a pretty decent life. She's out there gleaning like a poor person, for her and her mother-in-law. So, interesting statement here. He says, may Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel, reward you for what you've done, since it's under his wings. It's under his wings you've come to for protection. Let's look at that little statement for a minute. In Psalm 91 it says, he will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. I think the original actually says, under whose wings you have come to for refuge. For protection. I said protection, but the original says refuge, pretty much the same thing. And in Psalms it says the same thing, refuge. Under whose wings you have come for refuge. The Hebrew word that is translated as wings is kanaf. And the usual image is of a mother bird stretching out her wings over her chicks to guard it and protect it from storms and predators. But while the idea of protection and rest is certainly intended, the choice of words is to draw a very specific parallel. So if we jump ahead one chapter, which we're going to deal with next video, but if we jump ahead one chapter, spoiler alert, we see Ruth sneaking over to Boaz while he slept. And we'll quickly just deal with that verse. In the middle of the night, Boaz was startled and turned over, and there was a woman lying at his feet. In the darkness he asked, who are you? And she answered, I'm your handmaid Ruth. Please spread your robe over you. Spelling mistakes, guys, sorry. Please spread your robe over me, because you are my redeeming kinsman. Please spread your robe over me, because you are my redeeming kinsman. This is the part of the story that most of us have heard before, because it is so dramatic and also romantic. But look at the last sentence. It says that Ruth asked Boaz to spread your robe over your handmaid, because you are my redeeming kinsman. What it actually says, with a little Hebrew added back in, is spread your kanaf over your handmaid, because you are my goel. Kanaf, translated metaphorically as Yahusha's wings, being spread over Ruth for her divine well-being, is now used in the very same way, just hidden because of the English translation. That Boaz should spread his kanaf, his wings, that are metaphorically his robe, over her for her earthly well-being. And this is because Boaz is Ruth's goel, or kinsman redeemer. See, the spreading of his robe over her was a sign of him taking her under his wing, taking her to a place of refuge and safety. So, is the connection becoming clear to you? Did you understand that from up here? Wings is Kanaf. Boaz says up here, it's because it's under his wings you've come for protection. You who are the Elohim of Israel, you've come here to be protected, to be under his wings, under his refuge. And then in the next chapter, which we haven't got to yet, she says, spread your cloak over me. Spread your robe over your handmaid, because you are my Goel, my kinsman, redeemer. So, taking her under his wing, taking her to a place of refuge and safety. Is the connection becoming clear to you? Ruth, a widow back in Moab, didn't know much about Yahusha, but Yahusha put enough trust into her for her to know she wanted him. But now, this naive Gentile from the outside nations is in the process of learning more about the true Yahusha of the cosmos, whom she has given herself over to. This Gentile from the outside nations is in the process of learning more about the true Yahusha of the cosmos, who she has given herself over to. Yahusha is Ruth's ultimate place of refuge, and she has chosen to put herself under his kanaf, under his wings. She has chosen to allow him to be her refuge. She's chosen to put herself under his kanaf. Ruth did this when she made her 6-part declaration back in Moab and then returned to Judah with Naomi. That's what she declared there. I will go where you go. Your Elohim will be my Elohim. Your home will be my home. Please don't make me leave you, May Yahuwah curse us if we are ever parted except from death. So she made that declaration there and she converted. She crossed over from the outside nations to being Yisrael. So Ruth made the Ruth didn't do this. Ruth didn't make these promises passively. She insisted, remember? Ruth glued herself to Naomi and to Yahusha and wouldn't take no for an answer. She attached herself to Yahusha and to his people and wouldn't let go, no matter how logical and practical Naomi's argument against this course of action seemed. So Naomi even said, girls, go home. This is ridiculous. You're still young. You can have husbands of your own. I'm old. I'm going back to my home, to see if I can find some friends and, just find a life. It'll be a poverty, but, I'm going back to my people. You should do the same thing. No, Ruth glued herself to Naomi. So that's when she came and put herself under Yahusha's kanaf, under his wings. So that was just a little bit of a word play there from what Boaz said here, under his wings. And in the next chapter we find Ruth saying, spread your cover over me, spread your cloak over me so I can be under your wings. So one was a spiritual or divine calling, I'm crossing over from darkness to light, and the other was more of a practical, you are my kinsman redeemer, I've got earthly needs, can you help me please? Will you marry me? Or, look after me. But that's a spoiler alert for our next episode. So, that was fascinating, I found. If you didn't quite get it, rewind and watch it again. Ruth replied, Sir, it's so good of you to speak kindly to me and make me feel so welcome, for I'm not even one of your servants. I'm not even one of your servants. I instantly just thought then of the prodigal son, because he's in the slums, he's run out of money, he's just derelict, feeding the pigs, and he suddenly realizes my father's servants get treated better than this, So Ruth, that's just a random thought. Anyway, Ruth replied, Sir, it's so good of you to speak kindly to me and make me feel so welcome. I'm not even one of your servants. Boaz was attracted to Ruth by her youthful beauty and her rare character. Thus, he began almost immediately to show her special favour. Boaz was an old man at this time, successful and wealthy, and his unmerited kindness towards Ruth is a study in the wonderfully Hebrew concept of chesed. acts of loving kindness towards others as a response to Yahusha's love and mercy towards his redeemed. Not just random acts of loving kindness to any Tom, Dick and Harry you find in the street, or, just throwing your money to anybody, because then you'll end up like them with no money and they'll just go off and smoke it, drink it, inject it, whatever. Do whatever they've done to be in that place in the first place. No, Yahusha is talking about people who he has put love in you for, his bride, his family, So what we see in Boaz is a wonderful Hebrew concept called chesed. And chesed is acts of loving kindness towards others as a response to Yahusha's love and mercy towards his redeemed. His redeemed, all right? Only the redeemed. And of course, Ruth is exhibiting the same towards Naomi, even though she's not even fully aware of it. She just loves the woman and wants to help look after her. It's her mother-in-law. So Ruth's just baffled that he's showing her such kindness, because he's an old man. He could have just been harsh and strict, and I'm a field owner and I'm rich and this and that. You're a servant, and he could have just been harsh and strict, or even just professional, But, no, he's being very, very kind, to the point where all the religious people think there's a brooding romance going on, So, dirty old man. No, none of that. He's so impressed by her kindness, her reputation has gone ahead of her about what she's doing for her mother-in-law. Anyway, at mealtime, Boaz said to Ruth, "Come and eat with us. Oi, you boy, scoot over, make some room. Here you go, Ruth. Grab some bread and dip it in the sauce." So, right away, she sat down with the workers, and Boaz handed her some roasted grain, and Ruth ate all she wanted, and even had some left over. Boaz was demonstrating one of the most valued qualities of a human, chesed. He was actively showing her kindness. Actively, not just accidentally, or if it comes up, I'll be kind. He was active, initiative, showing it, doing it, stepping out, being actively kind to her. Gleaners were usually at best left alone to fend for themselves. But Boaz instead offered Ruth food from his own table. He offered for her to dip her bread into a concoction called ℬ𝒛, which is a sour sauce of sorts that is used to spice up dry bread. Not only that, but Ruth was allowed to sit with the reapers, those of higher status who were paid wages to harvest for the owner, Boaz. She was offered roasted grain, a rather standard fare for reapers during the harvest season, and was allowed all she could eat and more. So, then when Ruth went to start picking up grain again, Boaz told his men, "Don't stop her, even if she picks up grain from where it is stacked. In fact, be sure to pull out some stalks of grain from the bundles and leave them on the ground for her. And make sure you don't speak harshly to her either." Boaz's kindness is magnified when, after the meal, Ruth gets up to go back to her gleaning, and Boaz instructed his supervisors and reapers to allow Ruth to glean even among the sheaves. That's the harvest. That's the stuff, the wheat they've already bundled up. Yeah, getting ready to take away. He says, take some out from even those bits and throw them out. So she's got more. Ruth is generously telling his men to have her glean among the marim, the actual bundled sheaves. Even more, they had to pull out some of the stalks away from the bundles and let her take those. This is a most magnanimous act of charity. And as usual, there's another little gem to find in this sentence as well. Pull some of the stalks of grain from the bundles. Pull some of the stalks of grain from the bundles. We're going to talk very briefly here about being grafted in. Because what happens here in Ruth is very similar to something Paul says. In Romans 11 it says, "But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and became a fellow partaker of the root of fatness of the olive tree." There's something interesting about Boaz pulling out some of the stalks from the wheat and barley so that Ruth could gather them. And that something is in Romans 11, and it's contained in a discussion about the olive tree by Paul that deals with the means by which the outside nations, or what we call today Gentiles, how the outside nations are able to come under Yisrael's eternal blood covenant of deliverance. In other words, branches were broken off that I may be grafted in. In Romans 11, Paul represents a question. Has Yahusha cut off his people, the Hebrews, and replaced them with new Gentile converts from the outside nations who wish to follow the Messiah Yahusha? Is that what's happened? Has Yahusha replaced his bride? Is it no longer a Yisrael? Is it no longer Yisrael that he's got a blood covenant with? Has he replaced Yisrael with some other sect, some other movement, some other new thing? The answer he gives immediately is heaven forbid, no way. And then he goes on to explain just how a Gentile should view his new relationship in Yahusha with the original people of Yisrael that were divorced, mind you. So we're not lifting up the original people either. We're not putting them on a pedestal, but we're not getting rid of Yisrael either. Yahusha only made a blood covenant with one nation of people, and that is Yisrael. Even to this day, the people that are involved in that nation and who that nation is has changed a little bit though, because the outside nations, he's never had a blood covenant or agreement with them, and there's no deliverance outside the blood covenant. So in the book of Ruth, the Hebrew kinsman redeemer Boaz has pulled out some of the gathered stalks of wheat and barley from the sheaf so that Ruth could join in the choice harvest. So we have the metaphor of the olive tree. One's in Ruth and one's what Paul's talking about. Paul's talking about an olive tree. Boaz and Ruth are talking about the harvest, and they pull out the wheat from the sheaves, give it to Ruth, yeah? So we're just pulling a parallel here between what's happening in Ruth to what Paul said about the olive tree. So, book of Ruth, kinsman redeemer, pulled out some of the gathered stalks of wheat and barley from the sheaf so that Ruth could join in the choice harvest. Ruth's an outsider, a Gentile, remember? So we have the metaphor of the olive tree, a regular scriptural metaphor for Yisrael. Whenever you see the olive tree, you think of Yisrael, yeah? Where branches are removed by the Hebrew kinsman redeemer Yahusha. Branches were removed by the Hebrew kinsman redeemer Yahusha so that Gentiles, which is anyone not born a Hebrew, can be grafted in and partake of the choice harvest. So I know we can all find our lineage from Noah. We've all done that, but not everybody that came from Noah was a Hebrew. Only people that came from Abraham, who was the first man to officially cross over, not just a literal river, but not just the Euphrates, but he actually crossed over from darkness to light. He left the paganism of Babylon and went and followed Yahusha. And he didn't know where he was going. And he was the forefather. He was, the beginning of this movement, this revolution that was happening. And it's been happening ever since. About the land. And now, of course, we know the land is here in our hearts. But they were Hebrews, yeah? So you had to be a Hebrew to have the blood covenant of deliverance in you. If you weren't a Hebrew, you had to be grafted in. Even back in this ancient time, you had to be grafted in. You had to be circumcised in your flesh, and you had to put off all your pagan deities, and you had to follow, the Elohim of Yisrael, and only him. Even back here. So Paul's saying, nothing's changed. You got to be grafted in. In fact, some of these dickheads over here who think they're in the camp, who think they're good and well and high and mighty, and because they've been circumcised, and they've been cut off because they don't even understand who Yahusha is or what he's come to do. So branches have been broken off so that you and I can be grafted in. And the truth is, most of us today don't even know if we're born a Hebrew or not because of the scattering that happened back in 722 and other times as well, BC. So 273 2730 years ago, all of Yisrael was pretty much scattered in two major movements. So none of us really know what our lineage is, and it doesn't matter. The point is that all men and women can be grafted in to the blood covenant now. But the parallel I'm pulling here is just removing the sheaves. The principal pattern of Ruth is the same as Paul. All nations must join Yisrael in the way that counts the most, spiritually, divinely, through the blood covenant and portal connection on their circumcised hearts, in order to be redeemed by the Elohim of Yisrael. And to illustrate this fundamental truth, agricultural motifs are used, because Yisrael was an agricultural society, and so they could be more easily visualized and understood. Does Yahusha use agricultural idioms and metaphors and things like that today with us? No, not unless you actually work out in a field or on a farm or somewhere. No, he's working in your everyday life, in the shop, in the business, in the home, in the family you're in. He uses everyday things now. He might use a lot of technological things today in your life to prove a point. He uses what's in your life, in your century, in your generation. He uses what's relevant to you, to corner you, to get your attention, to squeeze, to stretch, flog, rebuke, chastise, to get a response. So Paul ends his argument by explaining something that ought to put all outside nations in their proper place. The reason, I didn't even know this bit, the reason that Yahusha has allowed Gentiles to do the unthinkable, which is to participate in what up till then had been an exclusively Hebrew blood covenant, without a national conversion of course. The reason that Yahusha has allowed Gentiles to do the unthinkable and participate in this is so that all Yisrael will be delivered, because remember, most of the tribes had been scattered and assimilated into the world. Gentiles being delivered are merely a byproduct of Yahusha's goal of delivering all of Yisrael. If that doesn't pop your top and your pride, what will? I'd never thought of it that way. Because most of Yisrael have now been, apart from the Yehudim, and look how they go on, the Jews, look how they carry on. They were the tribe of Judah and a bit of Benjamin. All the other 10 tribes scattered. No one knows who they are. Oh, people think they do, but they've been scattered. Nearly 3,000 years ago, they were scattered into the nations, lost their identity. So how's Yahusha going to get them back? As a byproduct of that, he's opened the doors for the outside nations, because that's where they all are. So it just makes sense that some of them are going to come in with them. And that's fine, because the prerequisite is repentance, immersion, receiving his ruach, his spirit, down payment, portal open, all that. So I thought that was interesting from that perspective. That's another reason why he opened the door to the Gentiles, because if he didn't, he won't be able to find his bride. And he's not going to find all of Yisrael anyway, because a lot of them aren't interested, and a lot of them have been broken off. Remember? It's not about your lineage anymore. Not about your lineage anymore. Ruth, from before time, was destined to be the Gentile grandmother of the Hebrew King David. Interesting, we're mentioning that now. Ruth was King David's grandmother. Ruth, from before time, was destined to be the Gentile grandmother of the Hebrew King David, who would go on to produce the Hebrew messianic line that led to the Hebrew Yahusha of Nazareth. How many Gentiles, how many women and men from the outside nations have been involved in this blood covenant, have been involved in this messianic line? Ruth was David's grandmother, and Yahusha comes from the line of David. So Ruth, in Yahusha's eyes, was a necessary element as a Gentile to bring about the Hebrew deliverer, whose purpose it was to deliver all Yisrael. But because of Yahusha including Gentiles at critical moments in the redemptive process, Gentiles would also be given the opportunity to be redeemed under the blood covenant that Yahusha gave to the Hebrews. There was no special new Gentile blood covenant handed down. We just graft into the same one. And anybody who thinks they're in it but aren't behaving and aren't obedient and don't even accept Yahusha or his name or anything like that, but they think they're grafted in, they're cut off if they were ever in there to start with. But those who are of the Hebrew lineage and know it, if they're not obedient, even though they might be physically circumcised, which is a covenant that no longer matters because the transformation is in the heart now. Your heart has to be circumcised. Get with it, guys. Circumcision of the flesh was so yesterday. I mean, please, you know? Oh my goodness. Beards, tzitz, circumcision of the flesh. That is so yesterday. Get with it, guys. That's not in vogue anymore. An outsider must be grafted into the commonwealth of Israel, both then and today. There are several more connections like these that we'll explore, but the point was to show the direct parallel in Ruth of the stalks removed from the sheaves for the sake of the Gentile Ruth. Stalks removed from the sheaves for the sake of the Gentile Ruth, which connects to Paul's metaphor of branches being removed from the olive tree for the sake of all Gentiles who would trust Yahusha. Because obviously a tree can only have a certain amount of branches, and if more obedient people want to add to the tree, he'll break some off that aren't being obedient. So let's get on with it. Boaz has been incredibly kind to Ruth. So Ruth, this is after the meal, Ruth worked in the field until evening. Then after she had pounded the grain off the stalks, she had a large basket full of grain, which she took excitedly to town to show Naomi how much she'd picked up. Ruth also gave Naomi the food she had left over from the luncheon with Boaz's boys. Naomi said, "Wow, look at all this. Where did you work today? Whose field was it? May Elohim bless the man who treated you so well." Then Ruth told her that she had worked in the field of the man named Boaz. "May Yahuwah bless Boaz, for he's shown that he is still loyal to the living and to the dead. Did you know that Boaz is a relative of mine? One of those who's supposed to look after us?" In Hebrew, Redeemer. In the original Hebrew it says, "Do you know that Boaz is a relative of mine, one of those who's supposed to redeem us?" In the original Hebrew. Really? Boaz even said I could stay in the field with his workers until they had finished gathering all his grain. My sweet daughter, it's good that you can pick up grain alongside the women who work in his field, because who knows what might happen to you in someone else's field. Because these are pretty archaic, barbaric times, aren't they? We saw that a few episodes ago with the gang rape and murder and everything. So Ruth the Moabitess stayed close to the other women while picking up grain in Boaz's field. So Ruth worked in the fields until the barley and wheat were all harvested, and all this time she lived with Naomi. When Ruth revealed Boaz's identity to her, Naomi was practically in shock at such wonderful fortune. Naomi instantly knew that it was the same Yahusha who had afflicted her with such bitterness, who now was afflicting her with such favour. Remember our last episode where she was in a complaint, she was in a predicament, a querulous predicament, a calamity. And Yahusha had put her in that place because of the behaviour of the men and what they would do. They left when they shouldn't have left the land. So it was the same Yahusha who had brought her bitterness, who was now bringing her such favour as to not only provide so much grain for their sustenance, but also to lead Ruth directly to Boaz, a family kinsman redeemer. At last, after so long a time of darkness, there was hope. Now, just in case you're not grasping what the bigger picture here is, we're going to talk a little bit now about the kinsman redeemer. We're going to go a bit deep and intense with it, because Naomi's got other things on her mind. We've already dealt with how she's poverty stricken now, got no way to support herself. She's got Ruth there, which is lovely, and Ruth's providing for her, loves her dearly. But to to get into the culture and the context, we're going to study the kinsman redeemer now. Because we've all heard the expression, particularly if you come out of the church, he's my kinsman redeemer. My redeemer lives, my redeemer lives. We sing songs, we wave our hands around, but we don't actually understand it from this point of view because it's nothing like what we thought. We know that Boaz is a kinsman redeemer. We know that Yahusha is our kinsman redeemer. Why, how, where, what's the connection? Let's go into it. Before I start, kinsman is just family. Kin, your next of kin. It's your family. So a kinsman is pretty much your family, your relative, no matter how distant it is, kinsman. And redeemer, remember we dealt with the word redeem for the first time when Yisrael was delivered from Egypt. And Yahusha said to his people, because I had to slaughter all the firstborns in Egypt, and he doesn't just slaughter people willy-nilly. He can't, shedding blood and death is it's the opposite to how he's all about life. So because I've shed all these firstborns in Egypt, you now owe me your firstborns so I can balance my books, because blood shed curses the land. He's got to balance his books. Balance has to be, that's just the way he operates. So I've got to balance my books. So you now owe me all your firstborns. And the firstborns were dedicated, and on the 8th day and all this sort of stuff, they're dedicated. And if they, if it was animals, they could buy them back or slaughter them or that, but you can't slaughter people. So they were given dedicated until the Levite priesthood was raised up, and they became Yahusha's priesthood. But before that, that's when we first heard about the word redeem. And redeem just means buy back. Buy them back. Redeem them back. Yeah? So keep that in mind. A kinsman is family, and a redeemer is someone who buys something back, someone back. There's a transaction that goes on. Keep those two words in your mind as we go on. Let's have an extensive look at the kinsman redeemer concept, because from here forward in the story of Ruth, that concept is front and center. It's important for us to understand it in its fullness, because otherwise we can get some wrong or incomplete impressions about not only the office of a kinsman redeemer in general, but also in Yahusha's role as our kinsman redeemer and how it affects our relationship with him. So let's go. First, the Hebrew word is goel. We mentioned it up the top further. We're going to talk about it again. The Hebrew word is goel, and it is this word that English scriptures generally translate into kinsman redeemer. But in fact, that's incorrect. More correctly, goel simply means a near relative who is able to perform a whole range of certain duties with his own clan or tribe. And only one of those many duties is as a kinsman redeemer. So goel does mean kinsman redeemer, but it means so much more. There's a whole list of things that he can do, and being a kinsman redeemer is only one of those things he can do as a goel. So it doesn't specifically mean it. It's not restricted only to a kinsman redeemer. Goel. Still a bit lost? Let's go into it. Firstly, we need to step back and understand that the solidarity, let's go into this culture, guys, and understand how they were thinking. We need to understand that the solidarity and continuation of a tribe, whether a tribe stayed solid and whether it lived on or whether it died in the bum, the solidarity and continuation of a tribe and a clan was paramount in ancient Hebrew and most Middle Eastern societies. We today, so they drew a very tribal mindset. How are we going to keep our tribe alive? How are we going to keep our tribe going forward so it doesn't die off after generations? We today like to say that the family is the basic social unit that our country operates under. We say that. And that is certainly true. But what is a family? Because of the way family has evolved in the Western world as opposed to the Eastern world, the idealized Western family has come to mean just dad, mum, and 2.5 kids living together in a single household. Grandparents, aunties, uncles are generally seen as family units of their own and secondary to the immediate family. That's what we see here in the Western world. That's a family. That's the nuclear family there. Mum, dad, 2.5 kids in the Western world. Eastern family is very different. I mean, if we had grandfathers, grandmothers, uncles, aunties, they have their own homes, they have their own lives, they're separate family units. Eastern families are very different. I'm not saying they all necessarily live under the same roof, but they live pretty close, and a lot of time they do. So they're classified together as the same family. All relatives live close together. They're not a separate family unit. So this is the Hebrew mindset here. The family, the clan, the tribe. Broken homes due to divorce or children born out of wedlock have put that ideal of identifiable family units into reverse over the past few decades. But nonetheless, this nuclear family formula remains, though fragile, as the norm for us. But this was not so. This was not so for ancient cultures like that of Israel. Scriptural families are not like modern Western families. The scriptural family was not seen as merely the parents and their immediate children. Rather, it was more clan-like, and families just automatically included what we'd call extended families too. Grandparents, uncles, aunties, first cousins, etc., etc. But even Western extended families still don't rise to the level of a scriptural clan that include all related members of a family who can be connected to a common son of the original founder of the tribe. So it goes way beyond any distant second, third, fourth cousins of the family, of the wife, the sisters, cousins, mother, sisters, brother. Everybody's included in the clan, in the tribe. This can amount to hundreds, even thousands of family members. Certainly in some cases, clan size, the want of power and autonomy, and the distance of time caused some clans to split into two. But even then, they recognized their common familial bond. So in the case of Boaz, we have no idea exactly what his relationship was with Elimelech. Remember, Naomi says he's our distant relative, from Elimelech's relative. We don't know what the relationship was. Rabbis have fancifully said he was Elimelech's nephew, but there is no evidence of such a thing. Whatever the relationship was, it must have been unimportant to the story, and equally likely it was not a very close kinship, especially as we think of close in our time. It was for the defense of the clan and tribe that the office of Goel existed. It was the defense of the clan and tribe. It was for the defense of the clan and tribe that the office of a Goel existed. Why would a clan or tribe need defending? Why would a clan or a tribe need defending? This is why the Goel existed. And the concept of the Goel is in Yahusha's instructions in Leviticus. The concept was that any rights that a man possessed that could be lost due to his inability to perform them could and should be resumed by his next of kin. If a man died, if a man was unable to work, if a man lost this, couldn't do that, couldn't do this, his next of kin should pick up the ball, run with the baton, keep going, or in the case of his death, continue the family line, continue his essence so that his afterlife continued. Remember how they thought? The closest possible next of kin bore both the senior position and the senior responsibility to perform those duties on behalf of the man who could not. There were a variety of reasons why a man might have to rely on his next of kin to assume such duties for him, and his own untimely death was among the most common. In Hebrew society, the closest of relationship after the parents was first brother and then uncle on the father's side. After that, it was uncle on the mother's side, and from there it could range from grandparents, first cousin, second cousin, and so on. The father's side always carried more weight than the mother's side, and should one side or the other be non-Hebrew, the Hebrew side, of course, is what mattered. One of the real dangers, this is interesting, and this is what I was talking about, why would a tribe or clan need protecting? One of the real dangers in ancient times was that through intermarriage with foreigners and then death of the Israelite male family member or leader, Israelite tribal lands could be lost to foreigners. So remember, we're talking about the solidarity and the continuation of the nation of Yisrael. And then within that, each of the 12 tribes, and within that tribe, the clans, and then the families, So the whole point was Israel tribes could be lost to foreigners, but the land. But nearly on par with that is that at the same time, nearly on par with that was that as time went on, it became more and more common for one Israelite clan member to marry someone of another clan, or for one member of a clan to marry even outside of their tribe. Either of these caused problems due to the laws concerning land inheritance, and Yahusha's Torah that declared that land allotted to Israelite clans and tribes should remain there in perpetuity. And again, the Goel played a key role in ensuring that none of these cases happened and Israelite land might not be lost to a foreigner. Starting to get a bit of a background here. Another and perhaps chief and most somber duty of a Goel was to be a blood avenger, a ℬ𝒨𝒻. It was a very important clan duty in ancient society that the nearest of kin hunt down and kill a person who has slain a family member. This idea of family retribution, or the carrying out of justice on behalf of the clan, is by no means extinct in the world today. Islamic society has blood vengeance as a basic tenet of its law system, and so is common in the Middle East and Far East. It wasn't visible to the Western world until recently, as we have a huge influx into Europe, America, and Western nations of Muslims who have brought that concept of family vengeance with them and fully intend to continue it as an inviolable religious principle. Thus, rather often today in the news, we'll hear of a husband beheading an unfaithful wife, or a father killing a man who had sex out of wedlock with his daughter and killing his daughter as well, or even a family member killing someone who has offended the family in some way that the offender is not even aware. And this system of blood vengeance was part of the Hebrew system, though not in the same way as it is in Islam. So the Hebrew system, the scriptural Torah system of blood vengeance in defense of the family, was the firm belief that Yahusha, in order to secure the sacredness of human life, had established that a murderer suffers the death penalty. So don't forget, Yahusha established all these principles. He hates murder, he hates bloodshed. So in order to secure the sacredness of human life, he established that a murderer should be killed, suffer the death penalty. In the system of justice that Yahusha handed down, payments of money in exchange for a murderer's life were not allowed. This was for spiritual reasons as much as for fairness and equality. In Numbers 35, you are not to accept a ransom for the life of a murderer condemned to death. Rather, he must be put to death. The spiritual reason for not accepting money instead of the criminal's life is that unjustly spilled blood pollutes the land. This was all about the land, remember? And the only atonement available, the only means to remove the impurity and all its consequences from the land, is the blood of the killer. While this is contained in the instructions given to Moses, in fact it is a basic Yahusha principle that was established hundreds of years before Mount Sinai, and we find it in Genesis 4. Yahusha said to Cain, remember, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood at your hands. When you farm the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a fugitive wandering the earth. So he was cursed because of the blood he shed. So, and hear this, because it is so key in what even our understanding of a Goel is and does, and thus it's part of our Messiah's role. Hear this. The blood avenger was regarded not only as the legal representative of the affected family and clan, but also the earthly legal representative of Yahusha himself, who was the highest avenger and nearest kinsman to his people. So, the office of a Goel, kinsman redeemer is only one part of a Goel, but a blood avenger is also part of the Goel as well. The blood avenger was actually not only acting as a legal representative to kill the one who had killed the one who had shed innocent blood, he was also acting as a divine representative of Yahusha, because Yahusha had said, this is out of balance now. There's a consequence for this, unless you kill the murderer. Make sense? That was still not the end of the duty of a goel. And our story of Ruth shows that he also had the obligation to marry a next of kin's widow if that was necessary to rescue the land from being lost to another clan, tribe, or foreigner. And to some degree or another, this operated as, or in lieu of, levirate marriage, especially if there was no brother of a deceased man available to marry the widow if she was childless. So now we're talking about land, how to redeem the land, keep hold of the land. Naomi obviously hadn't held on to her husband's land, had she? He died, it would have gone to the sons. The sons had now died. Where's the land that she's supposed to have? Where's the land? This was a well-to-do clan, remember? That's why they left Moab in the first place and were left Bethlehem, Judah, and went to Moab and were punished. You know, they were well-to-do. So they had land. Where is this land? How are they going to get it back? Someone's got to come and redeem it. Someone's got to come and look after this family, because they're hopeless. Through the death and the way that the death happened, they've got nothing. So the widow was now childless, husbandless and childless. Thus, in the book of Ruth, the marriage of Ruth to Boaz, that we'll see in our next chapter, was not really levirate marriage, since Boaz certainly was not a brother of the deceased. Remember we talked about levirate marriage? If a man dies, his brother will marry the widow so that the family line can continue, his essence can live on, they say. So this has nothing to do with Boaz. It's not levirate marriage. He was no one's brother, you know. It wasn't that close a relative at all. So it's not about levirate marriage here, but it is about a kinsman, relative, and a redeemer who's going to buy back the land that Naomi and her family ancestors had. So it's not about levirate marriage in this case, since Boaz certainly was not a brother of the deceased. Rather, it was the somewhat extended duty of the goel, kinsman redeemer, of Elimelech's clan, in this case Boaz, to marry the childless widow Ruth, not only to rescue land, technically on Naomi's behalf, but also to provide Ruth with a male child. Ruth had no way of, Naomi's husband had no way of his life essence, his afterlife continuing, because it was going to continue through his sons. His sons now died. Ruth's got no way, and Naomi's got no way. And the sons, isn't it in depth and intense? But where did the concept come from that the Messiah, Yahusha, would be a goel to his people? What's this got to do with Yahusha? Where did the concept come from that the Messiah, Yahusha, would be a goel to his people, a near relative who had familial obligations? Since when is Yahusha a near relative who's got obligations to us? Well, first, very early on, Yahusha was seen as the divine goel and as the one who would redeem his people, buy them back. Just as the concept of a goel happened shortly after the creation of Adam and Kuah, as we read earlier in that passage from Genesis 4. So it was that the concept of redemption happened before it was made part of the law of Moses on Mount Sinai. Redemption came to play long before Exodus, Mount Sinai, all that. He redeemed, he bought back, he jumped into deliverance mode the minute Adam and Kuah disobeyed him. He had to kick them out because the tree of life was here. They couldn't go near that. But he's been delivering, working this process of redemption, redeeming, buying back, working with, ever since the beginning. So the concept of a goel and redemption was pre-Sinai, and thus a foundational Yahusha principle that would figure into everything Yahusha would establish. And therefore, naturally, it would be part of his character. There are 33 passages in the Tanakh, that's the older text, that use the term goel, a noun, or its verb form, ga'al, to refer to Yahusha. But how does this now connect to deliverance? Well, not surprisingly, the Hebrews developed the idea of their Elohim Yahuwah as the Goel who produces deliverance for his people, and then extended that to his Messiah Yahusha. Did you hear that? Yahusha, as a rescuing Messiah who redeems, is hardly a New Testament invention. Rather, it is a fulfillment of a much older principle. Now look at how the Hebrew language rolls all these concepts of deliverance, redemption and Messiah into one, and then represents it as a means of victory. So, keep flowing with this, guys. It will all make sense. The Hebrew root word yasha literally means to be open, wide, free, to be safe, avenge, defend, deliver, help, preserve, rescue, get victory. Why is this word yasha? Why are these Hebrew symbols that make up the word yasha so important? Because the tetragrammaton, what they say, YHVH, Yahuwah, in other words, the name of Yahuwah plus the word yasha, which is deliverance really, Yahuwah plus yasha equals Yahusha. Start to let this gel. The word yasha is very important because without yasha, without Yahusha, without Yahuwah, our creator, coming to earth, Yahusha actually put on flesh, and became our deliverance. It's been Yahusha since the beginning. He just wasn't known as Yahusha. But he put on flesh for our deliverance. Yahuwah plus deliverance equals Yahusha. That's what this word means. Get victory. Deliverance. There are all sorts of derivatives of this word from which we get in the English deliver, to keep alive or to live. Evil and severe danger was also literally thought to be a narrowing condition. Evil and severe danger was also literally thought to be a narrowing condition. So it is from a narrow place, being in a squeeze or in a bind or in a tight spot, we might say today, that the sufferer cries out for help. Why do we cry out for help? Because we're in a squeeze, we're in a bind, we're in a depravity, we're in a broken, sick state. The sufferer cries out for help. Thus, when that help comes, he is now said to be in a wider place, free and rescued. Like being in a tight cage, being released to run in the fields, that sort of thing. You're free in wide open spaces. You're free, rescued, delivered. Therefore, in the Hebrew mind, and converting that to modern thinking, the idea of moving from a narrow to a wide place is victory. The idea of moving from a narrow to a wide place is victory. And victory is in this word yasha as well, which is the word deliverance. Yahuwah is our deliverance, Yahusha. So this is all coming into the idea of the kinsman redeemer. This is why he is our redeemer. The idea of moving from a narrow to a wide place is victory. The prophet Ezekiel, during the time of the exile of the Hebrews to Babylon, used the term to express the condition of a criminal who had repented of his trespasses against Yahusha, and thus by Yahusha's mercy had escaped the rightful consequence of a criminal, which is death, and continues to have life. So, now as pertains to the Messiah, the terms deliverance and redemption are utterly identical in purpose and meaning. Some people like the word redemption, some people like the word deliverance. They're both exactly the same word because they both mean the same thing, really. They are both utterly identical in purpose and meaning. This is pretty important for us to understand because too much the redemption, people say the redemption of the Old Testament is thought to be an inferior concept to the deliverance of the New Testament. Poppycock. That is not true because we can absolutely interchange the terms redemption and deliverance at any point throughout the scriptures. Take the word deliverance and put redemption there, it means the same thing. Take the word redemption, put the word deliverance there, it means the same thing. I personally like the word deliverance better because it implies that you have been delivered from something evil. However, if you, as it says, if you change it to be redeemed, what have you been redeemed? Redeemed means to buy back something. Yahusha bought us back from the enemy, bought us back from the evil one. There was a transaction that happened. So really it means the same thing. Delivered from darkness, bought back from darkness. The two words are interchangeable, they're the same thing. So, since Yahusha is the divine Goel, he is the divine Redeemer, and thus the divine Deliverer. Therefore, as our earthly Messiah, he must necessarily be the earthly Goel, the earthly Redeemer, meaning the same thing as the earthly Deliverer. And all this is understood in the Hebrew context as the Messiah being an earthly representative of the divine creator. He is the divine creator, but he is the divine creator in the flesh to become an earthly representative, you know. He's still the creator though, you know. So, did that make sense? Through Boaz, we see Yahusha's loving kindness towards Gentiles and his heart for the outsider. Let all these shadows and figures and wordplay and messages come into you and feel Yahusha's love. Now, does this sound an awful lot like our wonderful and amazing Master, King and Deliverer, Yahusha of Nazareth? Of course it does. But this also means that Yahusha is also obligated to be our Goel. So what are we saying? If we've established that he is the Goel, not only the divine, but the earthly Goel as well, kinsman redeemer, if we've established that, then as he's our kinsman. He's got obligations. He's obligated to be our Goel and to perform all the duties associated with the Goel. If we have become part of his family by means of grafting in and trusting him. So if we become part of his family, he is then obligated to do certain things for us. If we are in his family, if we are related to him, if he really is the kinsman redeemer, a family, someone in the family who buys us back, who does this, who does that, then he's got to do it. That's his obligation. And we have our obligations too. Did you get that? We Gentiles join Yahusha's family through repentance, immersion, and by trusting in him in obedience. And Yahusha's family members are the redeemed. And who are the original redeemed of Yahusha? Yisrael. Redeemed at the hand of Yahusha, the deliverer from Egypt. So we have Paul's metaphor of Romans 11 that has Gentile believers in Yahusha grafted in to the olive tree, Yisrael. And with that understanding of the amazing and divinely established office of the Goel, kinsman redeemer, we're now able to move further into the book of Ruth and better understand what is about to transpire. And always remember, as you study scripture, so we've gone into a lot of land here and family and Hebrew culture and tradition and everything here, but don't forget, as you study scripture, that Yahusha is no longer interested in lineage. I know we're spending a lot of time here, but that's because we're going back in time and it meant something back here. But in order for it to mean something to us today, we have to understand that and then bring it back. So when you're reading scripture, don't forget that Yahusha is no longer interested in lineage, the circumcision of the flesh, the promised land in the Middle East, or any other natural claim to fame or heritage. Not interested. Don't even have the conversations, guys. I don't care if you've got jet black skin, if you've got pale white albino skin, or any shade in between, any hue in between. Those conversations are not relevant. No matter what's gone down in history, what the blacks have done to the whites and whites have blacks to the blacks and reds have done to the greens and greens have done to the reds, and no matter what's all done, it's been out in the world. That's the world. That's not Yahusha's Commonwealth. Yahusha's people don't treat each other like that. And if they do, they're not his people. So you're not interested in any of that stuff. So stop talking about it. It's the affairs of this life. Get a life and get on with it. He only seeks his bride, those with a pure, blood-washed, cleansed heart. who will worship, behave for him in spirit and in truth, and allow him to finish the metamorphosis process of maturity, which just means perfection, that he's doing in her through the portal door of love on her circumcised heart, as he trains, flogs, rebukes, chastises, and goads her, so that she'll produce the good, the right, the pure behaviours of his fruits and gifts. That is why you're going through the agony that you are. He wants you, but you need to be crushed and consumed to bring forth his light, the precious oil of his living words. Did you understand that, guys? Feel free to go back and watch it again. It was pretty intense, all this stuff here. Really what it's saying is that Yahusha, just like Boaz, is our kinsman redeemer. He is our family, and therefore he was obligated to redeem us, to buy us back. And interestingly, a big part of this was talking about the clan and the tribal solidarity and continuation, so that they didn't peter out after a few generations. And of course, the issue was the land. The land was everything was about the land. Every conversation was about the land. Don't give up your land. Go conquer that land. Why haven't you conquered the land yet? Why haven't you driven out the Canaanites? Well, the land. Everything conversation was about not giving up the land, because the land was Yahusha's and he's allowed you to live on it, to be a wise steward of the land. You didn't own it. You were a renter. You were like a leasehold. So what does that tell us about our earthly vessels, guys? We don't own them. We didn't get the deed. We are leasing these earthly vessels. And how are we treating them? What are we allowing to flow through them? It's not about the outside, the shell. So, you're supposed to look after yourself because you are the temple, remember? But it's about the behavior. What you let in does not defile. It's what comes out which defiles us, So what's coming through your vessel? What's happening with your land? Promised land, remember? Because that's what Yahusha was obligated, because he's our kinsman redeemer. He was obligated to redeem us, to buy us back, because it's all about the land, remember? He cares about the land. And today, he couldn't care less about land out there. The land is us. We are going to form the new Jerusalem, the bride. Look, behold, I show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. So that was pretty intense, but that's what it's trying to say. He was our kinsman redeemer. So Naomi had needs, Ruth had needs, and Boaz came along and he was able to fit the bill. And in our conclusion, in our next video, we will see just how he did that. But as far as Yahusha goes, it gives us a much deeper understanding. Why? Because when Yahusha came along, they didn't even think they were waiting for a Messiah, a lot of them. They thought that Yisrael was the Messiah. They thought they were their own deliverance. They had it. The Torah was the deliverance. You just got to do it and obey it, and that was the deliverance. Well, we have to be obedient, but Scripture and the prophets all spoke about a deliverer, one who would come and redeem them. So Yahusha is the vine. We are the branches, the first fruit offspring of his living words. And of course, his living words are planted in seed form in our hearts. As we learn to give over, surrender, flow, and be obedient, we taste his rest, not only on the Shabbat day, but every day. It starts on the Shabbat day. You start being trained to shut yourself down, to stop working, to experience rest, peace. Remember, he's taking back a little bit of time and space, a little bit of time in your heart on the seventh day, and a little bit of space that he's starting to reign in, down payment. And that down payment wants to grow, invest, and become more and more and more. So as you practice, learn to give over, the rest it's not just restricted to the Shabbat day. Because as you practice the principles, the 3 rules, letting everybody have it, don't take anything personal, don't make excuses, all those things, you start to feel more and more peace, So every day, not just the Shabbat, we start to feel his redeeming joy, not only on high feast days of redemption, because remember, they're redemptive feasts, but we start to feel the joy of redemption not only on the feast days, but every day. We start to feel strengthened and secure, not just when we're reading his word, but all the time through his Spirit. In the beginning, after your immersion, if the only time you can feel peace and strength is through his word, then that's how he's training you. But after a while, not that you ever want to leave the word, but after a while you'll start to feel that in your life because you carry the word. He is the living word. He's in you. You hear his voice. So whether you're reading the pages of the word or hearing his voice and being obedient, it becomes your whole life. So as time goes on, we look back and realize that the evil, tormented person we once were has been picked up, washed clean, forgiven, and our feet set back down on a different path. Not an easy one, a narrow, rocky one, with enemies ambushed at every turn, and swarms of legions against us, and a very serious race to run of overcoming the world within us, to please our Master and not feel the pain of our uncleanliness when he comes near. That's the pain you feel because he wants to come near. And he's perfect. Remember the perfection, the radioactivity? He's perfect. Yes, he disciplines, he flogs, he goads, he chastises to perfect us. But all of that panic and fear and darkness just vanishes when Yahusha looks into our eyes, holds our gaze, and reaches into the very depth of our being with his wonderful, passionate love, so that we'd follow him to the ends of the earth and do anything for him, knowing just what he endured to produce the perfect blood of redemption, to buy us, his treasured bride, back, to buy us back, redeem us, so that our hearts may not be surrendered, stripped and sold off as scraps to the enemy. That's the land. He doesn't want his land sold off and stripped and, sent to the enemy. He wants us empowered through his portal to remain within the royal line of his divine reign, soon to appear. To remain. He doesn't want these vessels stripped and sold and kicked out and used by the enemy how they see fit. No, he wants us to remain in his divine reign. Royalty. He's made us royalty. He's bought us back, redeemed us as our kinsman, as our bridegroom. He's bought us back, We'd rather be dead than not have him. For we are the chosen, the delivered, the transformed, and we're the redeemed. Do you feel redeemed? Because religion and other mindsets will give a fake impression of how redeemed people should feel and how they should behave. And it's all very surface. It's all very high and social and it's all very, like a country club. Very happy. Oh, we don't want to talk about those things. No. That's not the redeemed. Because if that's what the redeemed is, we could easily feel like we're never going to make it. The redeemed is going through torture right now. Because what does the metamorphosis feel like? Even just from a butterfly, They say of young animals, you shouldn't help them break out of the cocoon. You shouldn't help them break the egg. You shouldn't, because otherwise they'll get out and they'll be limp. They won't have any strength. Part of the breaking out is what strengthens their muscles. The transformation from darkness to light, from immature to mature, the strength, the endurance, the character that's built from the struggle is what gets you through, And of course, it's him coming through us. To what degree do you want him to come through you? Do you want to be a querulent? Do you want to be in a querulous situation, a calamity, living a perpetual consequence 24/7? You just go from one hardship to the next, to the next, to the next. Or do you want to actually change and allow Yahusha to redeem you, even though you've been washed in the water maybe a long time ago and part of the bride a long time ago? It's time to wake up today to who you are. Your Redeemer lives. I know that my Redeemer lives. Even Job said that. And Job was back before we could have actually done Job already, because Job set even before the judges, apparently. But we're not going to. I'm not in the mood for Job right now. He knew that his Redeemer lived way back then. You know? Do you face that your Redeemer lives? This is the message the emissary took out into the world. He's not dead. He's alive. And you can be transformed. You can be delivered. That's what they wanted to do when he was alive. Just bring people to him. Come and look at this guy. Look into his eyes and see. You can be healed. You know? Everything. Darkness, pain, despair, sickness, everything was gone. None of it could affect him, because he was the light. And what are we supposed to be looking for in every situation? The light. That's how you become redeemed. Not just by showing up to 7 feasts a year, 7 redemptive feasts, by doing it every day. Looking for the light every day. Because the light, Yahusha, he's obligated to redeem us. If we are playing our part in the redemptive process, if we've showed up to be trained, if we're not despising the training, if we're standing here before him, if we're not cowering, if we're not fainting, if we're not despising the discipline, he is legally obligated to finish the work that he started. Why? Because he's a kinsman. And by his own instructions, a kinsman was required to finish the job if someone else died, if someone, you get my point, I think. So that's enough for today, guys. We're going to go through the finale in our next episode and how this all finishes for Ruth and Boaz. So stay strong, guys. It's very exciting going into the scripture in this depth. Thoroughly enjoying it. See you later.